Good to see you this week. Brought my cell phone this week, and even as I have my cell phone in my hand, we're filming this on another cell phone. And my guess is that all of you have your own version of a smartphone. Maybe some of you are even listening to this message on your cell phone. We're a connected people, talking, texting, emailing, shopping, reading on our cell phones. But while I was reading and studying and reflecting for our passage of the passage that we're looking at this week, a commercial popped into my mind. And it's a commercial that has a guy with a cell phone all over the place. Busy city streets, office buildings, sports arenas, and even a swamp. And no matter where he is, he asks the same question. Can you hear me now? Well, let's see how that might tie into this day's scripture reading. Comes from the 3rd chapter of 1 Samuel, the first 10 verses. The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. One night, Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel. Samuel answered, "Here I am." And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me?" But Eli said, "I did not call. Go back and lie down." So he went and lay down. Again the Lord called Samuel, and Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me?" "My son," Eli said, "I did not call. Go back and lie down." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. A third time the Lord called Samuel, and Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." Then Eli realized that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, "Go and lie down, and if he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. The Lord came and stood there, calling as at the other time, "Samuel, Samuel." Then Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." This story comes out of a time of darkness and silence. We're told it was a time of social upheaval, of political and religious turmoil. And this encounter talks about seeing and not seeing, hearing and not hearing, darkness and light. The good news is God is speaking. The bad news is no one seems to be listening. It's a time when it's as if the voice of God has been put on mute, and folks are blind to seeing the light piercing the darkness. It reminds me there's a big difference between hearing and listening. The dictionary defines hearing as the process, function, or power of perceiving sound. Our ears receive sound waves. It's natural. It's one of our 5 senses. But listening? Well, listening means to hear something with thoughtful attention and to give it consideration. I don't know about you, but maybe you have had the experience of talking to someone and you know that their hearing is just fine. You know their ears are picking up the sound waves, but you also know that what you're saying is going in one ear and out the other. They may be hearing you, but they sure aren't listening. It was in the silence of the night that Samuel hears someone calling his name, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And each time Samuel believes it's Eli calling to him, but each time he's sent back to bed. See, God is speaking and Samuel hears, but he needs to be taught to listen. The turning point comes when it finally dawns on Eli, this is the voice of God. And he teaches Samuel to respond saying, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." In the life of the church, we are now in the season of Epiphany. And as we looked at last week, Epiphany is all about God revealing God's self, making God's self known, making God's self clear and manifest. But this isn't a story about parting seas or rivers. There's no pillars of fire or smoke. There's just a voice calling in the night. A voice that marks the beginning of some endings and some new beginnings. You see, this essential story teaches us something about learning to listen. Not just hearing, but choosing to pay attention and choosing to respond. It's a story about tuning into the voice of God, and in order to tune into the voice of God, sometimes we have to tune other stuff out. We have to choose to tune out the noise of the world. I imagine that even as you're listening to this, you're hearing all the ambient noise of our area in the background, and it's hard to hear one voice in the middle of all those noises. There's a lot more noise than the ambient noise of our lives. There's the noise of our lives. There's the noise between our ears. There's just the chatter and distractions that are all around us. You know, in our lives, it might even take someone else to help us overcome our deafness. God may even speak to us through someone else, maybe even the last person we would ever expect. Dallas Willard writes, "Some use their ears to sift out only what they want to hear. Jesus urged his hearers to make great effort to hear, assuring them that what they received would be proportional to their desire and effort." The good news that's tucked into this story is that God is speaking. The God who spoke all creation into being one word at a time is the same God who speaks to us. The God who called all things good and human beings very good chooses to speak to us. And if we listen carefully, we might just hear truth. God's truth. I made you. I know you. I claim you. I love you, all of you. I always seek ways of peace. I always bring hope and healing. I always respond with forgiveness. You are mine, and I am yours. I am with you, and I will never leave you or forsake you. Now, having the courage to listen might just mark for us, as it did for God's people long ago, a time of transition, of endings and new beginnings. See, God is ever more ready to speak than we are to listen. So how do we incline our ears to hear the word of the Lord that pierces the darkness of our world? I think it's God who is asking, "Can you hear me now?" And it's up to us with humility and faith and courage to respond by saying, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Thanks be to God.